So, I was thinking about this the other day. How is it possible that two of the most, brilliant minds of the 20th century,
You're talking about Ayn Rand and Richard Feynman, right?
exactly, Rand and Feynman, how can they both look at the exact same physical universe, apply the exact same rigorous rules of logic, and arrive at the exact same conclusion that the concept of God is just completely invalid?
But then have completely opposite emotional reactions to the unknown.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's wild.
right. It's entirely opposite.
It's honestly one of the most revealing intellectual contrasts you can study. I mean, you have a strict philosopher on one side and a Nobel-winning quantum physicist on the other.
And they agree perfectly on the absolute mechanics of reality.
Perfectly. But their psychological orientation toward the mysteries of that reality, it just couldn't be more vastly different.
Well, welcome everyone to today's deep dive. Today we are taking what is essentially a strictly epistemological sledgehammer to the concept of God.
A sledgehammer is a good way to put it.
Yeah. And just to clarify for you listening, epistemology is basically the mechanics of knowledge. We're putting the theology aside entirely today.
Right, we're examining the very architecture of how we know what we claim to know.
Exactly. And more importantly, how we form concepts in our minds in the first place. So we are synthesizing four profoundly distinct perspectives from our source stack today.
We've got Ayn Rand's uncompromising philosophical objectivism, Richard Feynman's rigorous physics-based logic,
Christopher Hitchens' really sharp historical critique, and Roberto Rachewsky's perspective on secular individualism.
and before we jump in, a really quick but vital note on our sources for you listening today.
Oh yes, the neutrality disclaimer. We have to do this.
Really do. Because authors like Rachewsky and Hitchens, I mean, they pull absolutely no punches.
No, they do not.
You're going to hear comparisons between political systems like socialism and mystical religions. You'll hear blistering critiques of very specific political and religious figures.
Right, and we want to be super clear here. We're taking absolutely no political sides, left or right. We do not endorse the political viewpoints of the authors.
Exactly. We are strictly reporting the content of the original source material to convey their philosophical ideas accurately. We're analyzing the structural integrity of their logic, not, endorsing their politics.
Right. We're looking at the blueprints of their arguments, not moving into their houses.
I like that. Blueprints, not houses.
So, to really understand how these massive intellects dismantle the concept of a deity, I feel like we have to start by looking at how they built their own tools of reasoning.
We really do. You have to look at the genesis of a thinker.
Yeah, and Rachewsky's account in our sources gives us this deeply personal, just incredibly vivid narrative about being born a tabula rasa.
The blank slate. I mean, it is a foundational concept of philosophy.
Tracing back to John Locke, right?
Heavily back to Aristotle, actually. The whole premise is that human beings are not born with innate, pre-installed software.
You don't just pop out into the world with preloaded concepts of mathematics or morality.
Or theology.
Yeah.
Exactly. All knowledge has to be acquired through sensory experience and rational integration.
So, by definition, Rachewsky argues he was an atheist by default.
Right. Because he wasn't born believing in anything. Belief had to be actively downloaded into his mind.
And his family environment was basically an aggressive, relentless download attempt from literally every possible direction.
It's such a fascinating microcosm of human culture, honestly. Growing up surrounded by this astonishing buffet of competing ideologies.
And they're all fighting for space on his blank slate. It sounds completely exhausting.
Oh, totally. I mean, he describes having one Jewish grandfather who is physically handing him a Bible and a kippah, just actively trying to pull him into the synagogue.
Traditional Judaism.
Right. But then, on the exact same family tree, you have his other grandfather aggressively pushing Allan Kardec's Spiritism, handing him the Spirits book.
And it doesn't stop there.
Not at all.
He describes his aunts in Rio de Janeiro taking him to Umbanda Terreiros, which is an Afro-Brazilian religion, to get spiritual passes.
And dragging him out to the beach to make physical offerings to Iemanjá, the goddess of the sea.
Add to that, his nanny actively trying to force him to kneel at Catholic Mass.
Which he proudly refused to do, by the way.
Because his Jewish grandfather had already told him Jews don't kneel. I mean, you have a child sitting in the middle of a literal theological hurricane.
But the pivotal moment for him isn't just the religious pressure.
Right, it's the school.
Yeah. He gets to school, and a history teacher starts pushing what he explicitly calls a mystical secular ideology.
The teacher hands him the Communist Manifesto and tries to indoctrinate him into Marxism.
And that is the crucial architectural link Rachewsky makes. It's so important.
Why group Marxism with Umbanda and Catholicism, right?
Exactly. Because structurally, from an epistemological standpoint, they all function exactly the same way.
Society is constantly demanding that the individual subjugate their own reasoning to a collective dogma.
Whether that dogma is entirely supernatural or entirely secular, the mechanism of control is identical. They all demand a leap of faith.
They demand that you surrender your blank slate to a pre-written, unquestionable script.
And his response was just a flat, defiant no.
This is no.
He recognized at an incredibly young age that to accept any of these systems, you have to consciously turn off the critical faculties of your own mind. You have to abandon reason.
He essentially built a firewall around his blank slate.
That's a great way to describe it.
He realized that belief in the absence of evidence isn't a virtue. It's an act of intellectual surrender.
Which perfectly mirrors the childhood experience of Ayn Rand in a really profound way, even though her environment in early 20th century Russia was radically different.
Right, because Rand notes that she had practically zero religious training.
Her parents were nominally Jewish but completely secular, so they never imposed any religious framework on her.
She was essentially left alone with her own mind. And at age 13, she just sits down, thinks through the concept of religion, and decides she is an atheist.
Just like that. The fact that she arrived at this independently at 13 just speaks to her profound, almost intimidating independence.
Totally. And she identified two primary pillars for her atheism at that young age.
Which would eventually become the bedrock of her entire philosophical system, objectivism.
So what was the first one?
The first was purely epistemological, aligning perfectly with what we just discussed with Rachewsky. Belief without evidence is rationally untenable.
Meaning, if there is no proof for a claim, the only mathematically and logically sound response is to reject the claim.
Exactly. But it's her second reason that hits with so much psychological force. She didn't just find religion factually incorrect. She found it inherently degrading to humanity.
Degrading. Okay, let's unpack that for a second.
Yeah, Rand argued that religion demands a psychological inferiority complex.
Like the physical postures demanded by almost all major world religions.
Exactly. Think about it. Bowing, kneeling, prostrating. To Rand, these aren't just, cute cultural traditions. They are physical manifestations of self-abasement.
I'm trying to visualize this from her perspective. You have human beings who, as far as we can observe, are the absolute highest beings in existence. The only creatures capable of reason, art, civilization.
And religion tells them they are born broken.
Right. It tells you that you are inherently sinful, flawed by design, and that you have to spend your entire life begging for forgiveness from an invisible, supposedly perfect master.
To Rand, human life and human reason are the ultimate values. Any system that attacks your self-esteem and demands you view yourself as a miserable sinner is not just a logical error.
She saw it as a moral crime.
Yes, it destroys the very psychological engine you need to live a happy, productive life.
So we have Rachewsky rejecting the ideological buffet, and Rand rejecting the psychological degradation of worship. This brings us to young Richard Feynman.
Oh, Feynman's childhood epiphany is so good.
It wasn't about the morality of religion or the pressure of dogma at all, was it?
No, it was about the fundamental mechanics of human language. And his father was instrumental here.
They used to go for walks in the woods, right, in New York.
Yeah, far rock away. And his father would point out a bird, but he wouldn't just give Richard the name of the bird.
What would he do?
He would tell him, you can know the name of that bird in all the languages of the world, but when you're finished, you'll know absolutely nothing whatever about the bird.
Wow. That is such a massive distinction to teach a kid.
It really is. Knowing that a bird is called a brown-throated thrush in English, or translating it into Portuguese or Japanese, tells you absolutely zero about the actual organism.
Nothing at all. It doesn't tell you how the bird navigates during its migration.
It doesn't tell you the wingspan-to-weight ratio required for it to achieve lift.
It doesn't tell you how its nervous system processes the decision to take flight when it hears a twig snap.
Exactly. Feynman's father taught him the absolute barrier between a label and a mechanism.
A word is just a placeholder. It's a pointer. But knowing the pointer is not the same as knowing the thing it points to.
And that single lesson became the driving force of Feynman's entire career as a physicist. He spent his life refusing to accept vocabulary as a substitute for understanding.
You have to look past the label and demand to see the gears turning.
Right. And eventually he takes this exact same ruthless scientific standard and applies it directly to the word God.
Okay, let's unpack this. If Rachewsky is right, and we are all born blank slates, and if Feynman is right that human beings should demand to see the physical mechanisms behind the labels, that ignores a rather massive piece of human history.
Know where you're going with this.
Right. Why did almost every single ancient, unconnected culture on Earth independently invent a pantheon of deities? If we aren't hardwired for it, why is the urge to invent gods so universally hardwired into us?
It's the essential question, and it's where Christopher Hitchens' analysis of evolutionary psychology comes in to bridge the gap.
Because Hitchens argues that the universality of religion is not evidence of divine revelation?
No, it is evidence of human biology. Specifically, it is pattern recognition gone haywire and agency detection run amok.
Agency detection, meaning our brains are wired to assume there is an agent, like a conscious entity behind an event.
Precisely. Let's look at it from the perspective of early human survival on the savannah. You are a primitive hominid, and you hear a rustle in the tall grass.
Okay, I'm a hominid, I hear a rustle.
You have two choices. You can assume it's just the wind, a natural, unguided process, or you can assume it's an agent, a predator, a lion, a rival tribe.
Well, if I assume it's the wind and it's actually a lion, I get eaten and my genes exit the gene pool.
Exactly. But if you assume it's a lion and it's just the wind, you run away, you survive, and you reproduce.
So over hundreds of thousands of years, evolution aggressively selected for human brains that were hyper-tuned to look for intention, design, and invisible agents.
Better safe than sorry is literally the evolutionary algorithm here.
But then these early humans with hyperactive agency detection started looking up at the sky.
And that's where the trouble starts. They experience a terrifying thunderstorm, or a catastrophic drought, or an earthquake.
Or a child suddenly dies of a fever.
And they have absolutely no concept of atmospheric pressure, tectonic plates, or germ theory. But their brains are screaming at them to find the agent responsible.
So they used the best cognitive tools they had available at the time. They invented stories.
Exactly. If the sky is booming, there must be a giant invisible man up there throwing lightning.
If the crops die, the invisible people under the earth must be angry.
They populated the world with spirits, demons, and gods as a desperate early coping mechanism to deal with a terrifying, unpredictable universe.
So the human urge for religion isn't a hunger for the divine, it's just a hunger for causality.
We needed causes. And when we didn't have science, we invented invisible people to act as the causes.
So Rachewsky, Rand, and Feynman simply represent the modern point in human development where we finally have the intellectual capacity to consciously reject that primitive survival software.
Yes. We don't need a thunder god anymore because we know what a cumulonimbus cloud is.
Right. And once you recognize that God was originally just a linguistic label invented by terrified early humans to cover their own ignorance of nature, you have to subject that label to Feynman's test.
You have to demand to know the difference between naming the concept and knowing what the concept actually is.
Which brings us to the absolute epistemological void of theology. Let's apply Feynman's bird analogy directly to the concept of God.
When Feynman looked at religion, the very first wall he hit was the definition problem.
The definition problem. Meaning what, exactly?
He realized that if you gather 10 deeply religious people in a room and ask them to precisely define what God actually is, you don't get a coherent answer.
You get 10 mutually exclusive contradictory answers.
Right. Or, more commonly in modern theology, you get the claim that God is entirely beyond definition.
And Feynman, looking at this through the lens of physics and logic, points out that a concept that fundamentally defies definition is epistemologically useless.
If a theologian claims that God is beyond human categories, that God transcends all measurable properties, they might feel they are being deeply spiritual and humble.
But logically,
they have just destroyed their own argument.
because if a concept has zero definable properties, you literally cannot distinguish a universe where it exists from a universe where it does not exist.
Feynman illustrates this with a brilliant, highly rigorous thought experiment. He proposes a theoretical entity, and he calls it a blog.
A blog, like on the internet.
No, not a website. It's just a nonsense word he chose. A placeholder. He says, imagine this blog has no mass. It has no spatial extent, meaning it takes up zero physical room.
Okay, no mass, no space.
It possesses no energy. It does not exist within the dimension of time. And crucially, it has absolutely no causal power to affect anything in the physical universe and cannot be detected by any scientific instrument that could ever be built.
And then he springs the trap. He asks, does the blog exist?
Right, and his logical conclusion is that the question itself is entirely meaningless.
An entity that is defined exclusively by its total lack of any detectable interacting properties is utterly indistinguishable from its own absence. Let's ground this for the listener with an everyday analogy, because this is where theology often hides.
Yeah, analogies help a lot here.
So what does this all mean? Imagine telling a friend you have a roommate. Naturally, you ask to meet them.
Of course.
But I tell you, well, my roommate is completely invisible. Also, they make absolutely no sound. They take up zero physical space in the apartment.
Right.
They don't pay rent. They don't eat any food. They cast no shadow. And they leave absolutely zero evidence of ever having been here.
So at what point do you gently suggest to your friend that the word roommate in this scenario isn't describing a reality, it's just a grammatical placeholder pointing at a complete void?
It's pointing at nothing. The word roommate has lost all meaning.
And what's fascinating is how this completely dismantles what academics call the God of the philosophers.
Oh, right. Because modern theologians often try to defend God from scientific refutation by constantly retreating.
Exactly. They strip away human traits. They say, well, God doesn't actually have a beard and sit on a cloud. God is pure being, or the ground of all existence, or an immaterial essence.
But Feynman shows that by stripping away all physical, measurable properties just to protect God from being tested, theologians have defined God right out of existence.
They are pointing at the empty apartment and demanding we treat it as an occupant.
Which is wild. And this maps flawlessly onto Ayn Rand's rigorous framework for how human beings form concepts.
Yeah, according to scholar Robert Mayhew's analysis in our sources, Rand's entire philosophy rests on the idea that for a concept to be valid, it must be derived from actual, observable facts of reality.
Okay, break that down for someone just starting to study philosophy. How does human knowledge actually work for Rand?
Human knowledge is hierarchical. You can point to an oak tree, a pine tree, and a maple tree, abstract away their specific differences, and form the valid concept of tree.
Because they all exist in reality.
Exactly. You can observe instances of human beings solving problems and form the valid concept of intelligence. Everything must trace back to a physical reality.
But Rand argues that the concept of God is structurally, fundamentally invalid. It breaks the rules of human cognition.
Why? Because you cannot simply take traits that exist in reality, like human knowledge or human strength or human goodness, and arbitrarily stretch them to an impossible infinite degree to invent a magical entity.
You cannot take the concept of knowing things and arbitrarily stretch it to omniscience.
Right. You cannot take the concept of being strong and stretch it to omnipotence.
And the reason you can't do that relies on Rand's core axiom, the law of identity, originally formulated by Aristotle.
A is A. Everything that exists has a specific identity.
And identity inherently implies limits. To be something is to be bounded by what you are.
A rock has the identity of a rock. It cannot spontaneously turn into a bird. A human mind can know many things, but its capacity is physically bounded by the structure of the brain.
So omnipotence and omniscience transcend identity. They attempt to move from the limited, real world to the unlimited, impossible world.
Rand points out that doing this is a massive error in concept formation. You aren't creating a higher truth. You are integrating errors, contradictions, and false propositions into your own mind.
You are creating what her character John Galt in Atlas Shrugged calls a plastic fog.
I love that phrase, plastic fog. Plastic, because it is completely malleable, the mystic can mold the definition of God to win whatever argument they are currently losing.
And fog, because it obscures reality and blinds the person using it.
And this leads directly to what philosophers call negative theology. Mayhew highlights this through Galt's speech.
Galt points out that mystics always end up defining their superior realm by aggressively wiping out reality.
Exactly. They never identify what God is, they only ever tell you what God is not.
God is that which is unknowable. Heaven is the non-earth.
The soul is the non-body. The infinite is the non-finite.
They construct an entire alternative universe purely out of negations of the universe we actually live in.
It's basically an act of intellectual vandalism. Rand argues this doesn't add a single drop of actual knowledge to humanity. It's not an act of defining, it's an act of erasing.
The mystic is demanding that you treat the deliberate destruction of your own cognitive tools as a form of profound, sacred wisdom.
But the real trouble for theism starts when they try to take this undefinable negative concept, this plastic fog, and force it to interact with the physical laws of the actual universe.
Which brings us to the interaction problem and the complexity fallacy.
Yes, the mechanical headache of theology.
Right. If God is fundamentally undefinable and immaterial, what happens when believers claim this entity actually does things, like parting the Red Sea, or curing a disease, or just answering a daily prayer?
This is Feynman's interaction problem. Let's look at the physics of an answered prayer. The claim is that a non-physical mind, a consciousness with no neurons, no electrochemical signals, no energy, and no spatial location, listens to your thoughts and then alters the physical state of the material world in response.
By what actual mechanism? If an immaterial thought decides to move a physical tumor out of a human body or alter the weather patterns to stop a drought, physical work is being done.
Force is being exerted on matter.
That's the crux of it. Feynman points out the absolute inescapable dilemma here based on the laws of thermodynamics.
Option A.
Yep.
God has physical properties that allow him to interact with and exert force on matter.
But if that is true, God is suddenly part of the natural physical universe. He is composed of energy and forces, which makes him fully subject to scientific testing, measurement, and limitation.
He becomes finite, which instantly ruins the mysticism.
So they pivot to option B. God remains strictly non-physical, completely outside the universe, but still somehow reaches in and moves matter around.
But to accept option B, you have to accept that every single time a prayer is supposedly answered, the most precisely tested and mathematically verified laws of physics are being violently violated.
The conservation of energy states that energy cannot be created or destroyed in an isolated system.
If a non-physical God reaches in and alters reality, energy is being magically introduced into a closed system from nowhere.
And Feynman, as a quantum physicist who helped build the atomic bomb based on the absolute reliability of these physical laws, simply refuses to accept that physics is fundamentally broken in a highly convenient, completely untestable way just to allow for miracles.
Right. And Christopher Hitchens hammers the empirical side of this home. He points out that humanity has actually tested this.
Have they? How?
Every rigorous double-blind study ever conducted on intercessory prayer, where people pray for sick patients in hospitals without the patients knowing, shows it has exactly zero effect on medical outcomes.
Wow. Zero effect.
Prayer is just internal monologue. It might serve as a psychological comfort for the person praying, but there is no invisible force reaching through the cosmos to alter the laws of cellular biology just because you phrased your petition correctly.
But believers often retreat from specific miracles to the grandest miracle of all, the universe itself.
Ah, yes. The teleological argument, commonly known as the argument from design.
It is incredibly seductive, isn't it? You look at the human eye with its lens, retina, and optic nerve all working in perfect synchrony, or you look at the intricate folding of proteins,
Or the precise orbits of planets.
and the human brain with that hyperactive agency detection we talked about screams. Come on, a random explosion didn't make this. Design requires a designer.
It feels like common sense. If you find a watch on a beach, you assume a watchmaker.
But Feynman delivers a devastating logical counterpunch from the realm of physics and information theory that we can call the complexity trap. Let's break this down carefully for the listener.
Okay, so Feynman says, let's provisionally accept your premise. The rule is, complex things require an intelligent designer. The universe is undeniably complex, therefore it requires a designer, which we will call God.
Okay, simple enough, but now apply the exact same rule to God. What is the nature of this God?
Theologians claim God is omniscient. This means God's mind contains the complete, flawless information about the exact quantum state, position, and momentum of every single subatomic particle in the entire universe.
Across every single microsecond of time, from the Big Bang to the heat death of the cosmos.
Think about that from an information theory perspective.
If you wanted to build a hard drive that could store a perfect one-to-one simulation of the entire Earth down to the last atom, that hard drive would literally have to be larger and more complex than the Earth itself.
Therefore, a mind that holds all the data of the universe must, by mathematical definition, have an information content vastly, unimaginably greater than the universe itself.
God is infinitely more complex than the universe he supposedly designed.
So, if we rigidly follow the believer's own rule that complex things cannot exist without a designer, then this hyper-complex God absolutely requires an even more complex designer to explain him.
And that ultra-God requires a mega-God to design him.
It's an infinite regress. It's the classic turtles all the way down.
Feynman points out that invoking a massively more complex entity to explain a slightly less complex entity isn't actually an explanation at all. You haven't solved the puzzle.
You've just kicked a much bigger version of the puzzle down the road.
The only way believers can escape this trap is by suddenly, arbitrarily changing their own rules. They say, well, the universe is complex, so it needs a designer, but God is complex, and he's just the kind of thing that doesn't require an explanation.
But the second you do that, you have taken a sledgehammer to the foundation of your own argument.
Right. If you are willing to admit that an incredibly complex, data-rich entity can just exist without a designer, then there is absolutely no logical reason why the universe itself can't be the thing that exists without a designer.
You cannot have it both ways. You can't insist on a rule and then grant your favorite entity immunity from it.
And this is where Hitchens brings in the massive paradigm shift of Charles Darwin.
Darwin provided the actual mechanism-based solution to apparent design in biology.
Evolution by natural selection. It completely solves the watchmaker analogy.
It explains mathematically how you can achieve breathtaking complexity like the human eye or the aerodynamics of a bird's wing through entirely natural, blind, unguided processes.
You start with simple, replicating chemistry. Random mutation provides variation.
The environment filters out the failures. Over billions of years, you move from the simple to the complex without ever needing a top-down, intelligent designer drawing up blueprints.
The complexity is generated from the bottom up.
But wait, pause on that for a second. Let's really push on this.
Okay, let's push.
Because even when you explain evolution, believers will just take one step further back. They'll say, okay, fine, maybe biological evolution is real and natural selection designed the eye. But who created the universe in the first place? Where did the initial matter come from?
Here's where it gets really interesting. If the math of physics proves a designer makes things more complicated, why do people still use the who created the universe argument? Why is that specific argument so incredibly sticky for human beings?
To answer that, we have to shift from the physical sciences into pure philosophy. We have to explore how basic axioms of existence are misunderstood by theists.
The cosmological argument.
Yes, the cosmological argument is probably the most common defense of God today. The premise goes like this. Everything that exists has a cause. The universe exists. Therefore, the universe has a cause, and that first cause is God.
Right. And as both Robert Mayhew, channeling Ayn Rand's philosophy, and Christopher Hitchens point out, the argument is immediately, embarrassingly self-defeating in its very first premise.
It suffers from the exact same special pleading as the design argument.
If the absolute rule is that everything needs a cause, then who caused God?
If the believer answers that God is eternal and doesn't need a cause, then the first premise that everything needs a cause is demonstrably false.
And if the premise is false, there is no logical barrier preventing the universe itself from being eternal and uncaused.
Mayhew also identifies another fatal flaw here called the fallacy of composition.
The fallacy of composition. Okay, what's that?
The fallacy occurs when you assume that what is true of the parts must also be true of the whole.
Like just because every brick in a wall weighs 1 pound, it doesn't mean the entire wall weighs 1 pound.
Exactly. Within the universe, we observe causality. We see that a tree is caused by a seed and a human is caused by parents.
But it is a massive logical leap to assume that because the parts of the universe interact via cause and effect, the universe as a whole requires a cause from outside itself.
But the deepest, most profound philosophical error in the cosmological argument is how it treats the concept of nothing.
Ah, yes. This is a concept that Ayn Rand identified and brilliantly named the reification of the zero.
This is an advanced philosophical concept, but it's absolutely vital. Let's simplify this for the listener.
Please, dear.
People constantly ask the seemingly profound question, why is there something rather than nothing?
It sounds like the ultimate mystery of existence.
It does, but Rand points out that the question itself is structurally flawed because nothing is not a thing. It is not an alternative state of existence that reality could have chosen.
Nothing is purely a relational concept in the human mind.
Let's use an analogy to really clarify this. If I reach into my jacket pocket and find it empty, I can verbally say, I have nothing in my pocket.
But you are not literally holding a metaphysical entity called nothing in your hand.
No. I am simply using shorthand to mentally specify the absence of a specific concrete object, maybe my keys or my phone.
You literally cannot conceive of nothing, except in direct relation to concretes that actually exist.
Yes. You can't have a jar full of nothing. So when theologians or even some theoretical physicists talk about the universe emerging from nothing, they are committing the reification of the zero.
They are treating nothingness as if it were a dark, swirly, special kind of existence from which the universe somehow popped out,
They are making a non-entity into an entity.
which violates the absolute bedrock of Ayn Rand's philosophy, her core axiom: existence exists.
Existence exists means exactly what it says. The universe is not a discrete object sitting inside a larger box. The universe just means the sum total of everything that is. It is the entirety of reality.
Therefore, it doesn't require an explanation because it is the base from which all explanations must start. The concept of an explanation only applies to how things within the universe interact with each other.
John Galt delivers a mic drop moment on this exact topic in Atlas Shrugged. He says that demanding an explanation for existence itself is asking to prove reality by means of non-reality.
It's an incoherent request. It's asking to step outside of everything that exists so you can look at it from the perspective of non-existence. You can't do it.
The universe doesn't need a cause. It just is.
And once you grasp that axiom, that existence exists, the entire cosmological argument just evaporates.
You realize that positing a God who lives outside the universe to explain the universe is just adding a useless, invalid concept that solves zero problems and creates infinite contradictions.
Okay, so if the physical arguments fail, the design arguments fail, and the cosmological arguments fail, believers inevitably retreat to their strongest emotional fortress.
A moral argument.
All right. They argue that regardless of physics, we need an all-knowing God to provide a foundation for human morality, justice, and free will.
But Feynman, relentless as always, applies the exact same rigorous logic to the concept of omniscience and all-knowing God, and finds it logically irreconcilable with human free will.
Let's look at the claim. God completely knows the future. He knows every thought you will ever have, every action you will ever take, and every choice you will ever make before you are even born.
If that premise is true, then the universe is perfectly deterministic. The future is entirely fixed, written in stone in the mind of God.
And if the future is fixed, human choice is a complete illusion. You are just an actor reading lines from a script that was finalized eons ago.
You couldn't choose to do otherwise if you tried, because doing otherwise would make God's foreknowledge wrong, which is impossible.
Which raises an incredibly disturbing question about divine justice. If you are predetermined to commit a sin, if your actions were locked in before the Big Bang, how can you possibly be held morally responsible for it?
A God who creates a deterministic universe, programs you to sin, and then tortures you in hell for your predetermined actions is, as Feynman implies, conducting a trial where the verdict and the execution were scheduled before the accused even existed.
It's not divine justice. It is absurd, sadistic theater.
But Feynman also looks at the scientific alternative. What if the universe isn't perfectly deterministic?
Because, as a pioneer of quantum mechanics, Feynman knew that at the subatomic level, there is genuine inherent randomness in the universe.
Radioactive decay, the spin of an electron, these things are probabilistic, not predetermined.
Right. And if an event is genuinely random and physically undetermined, then its outcome literally does not exist to be known before it happens.
So if the universe features actual quantum randomness, it is impossible for God to know the future. Therefore, omniscience is logically incoherent with physics.
It's a binary trap. You either have genuine free will, which means God doesn't know everything, or you have an all-knowing God, which means human beings are just biological meat puppets. You cannot logically have both.
Which brings us directly to Christopher Hitchens and his brutal analysis of the problem of evil.
Hitchens argues forcefully that the immense, staggering amount of suffering in the world is not some mysterious puzzle we just have to trust God's plan on.
No, it is a total decisive refutation of the concept of an omnipotent, omnibenevolent God.
Let's look at childhood leukemia, which Hitchens often cited. If God is truly all-powerful, he has the physical ability to stop childhood leukemia instantly.
If he is truly all-loving, he would deeply want to stop it.
The fact that childhood leukemia continues to exist, destroying families and causing unimaginable pain to innocent children, logically proves that a God who is both all-powerful and all-loving does not exist.
Hitchens states that you cannot reconcile the screams of a tortured child with the concept of a loving creator. It is an insult to human empathy to try.
The world we actually observe, a world full of random natural disasters, horrifying diseases, animal predation, and human cruelty, is precisely the world we would expect to see if there are no supernatural oversight whatsoever.
It is the unguided product of blind evolutionary processes in an indifferent physical universe.
So, what does this all mean for us? Without a divine judge, doesn't morality just collapse into total chaos? Religious people always say, without the threat of God, aren't we all just animals permitted to murder and steal?
It's probably the most pernicious myth perpetuated by religion,
Yeah.
and both Hitchens and Roberto Rachewsky dismantle it beautifully.
Because Hitchens argues that religion actually poisons morality.
Yes. If you are only doing a good deed because you fear eternal torture in a lake of fire, or because you want a golden mansion in heaven, you aren't actually practicing morality.
You are practicing calculated, selfish prudence over an infinite timeline.
Doing good just to avoid a cosmic spanking isn't virtue. It is mere self-interest.
Hitchens argues that true morality is rooted in human empathy, solidarity, and reason. We recognize that other conscious beings can suffer or flourish, and we use our rational faculties to build a society that minimizes suffering and maximizes human well-being.
And Rachewsky takes this ethical framework directly into the socioeconomic realm. Remember, he rejected the mystical collective of Marxism just as hard as he rejected the mysticism of religion.
He argues that a secular society based on strict individualism, the protection of private property, and free markets is the most profoundly moral system possible.
Why? Because it is the only system that respects human dignity in the real physical world. In a rational, secular society, actions have earthly consequences.
If you do good, if you invent things, if you create value for your fellow humans, you are rewarded here and now. You don't wait for heaven.
If you do harm, the state's only legitimate role is to step in and protect the individual rights of the victims.
A secular, rational morality respects human beings as ends in themselves. It treats them as sovereign individuals capable of greatness, rather than treating them as broken, diseased sinners who must serve a mystical collective or a divine dictator.
Which brings us to the emotional climax of these perspectives.
Right. Having dismantled the concept of God logically, scientifically, and morally, we have to look at how these massive intellectuals actually orient themselves toward the universe that remains.
Because here is where Ayn Rand and Richard Feynman diverge emotionally, even though their logic is identical.
Yes, Ayn Rand defines her position as intransigent atheism. The scholar Robert Mayhew makes this abundantly clear in his analysis. Rand is totally uncompromising.
She refuses to communicate, debate, or deal with people on any terms other than strict reason.
Rand absolutely despised the word mystery. For her, the concept of a mystery is heavily weaponized by mystics to hide their plastic fog.
To Rand, a lack of knowledge isn't some magical sacred realm to be revered. It's just ignorance.
It's a gap in our current understanding that needs to be systematically studied, broken down, and conquered by the human mind.
It is never, ever a license to invent fantasies or fall back on faith.
She viewed faith as a short circuit of the mind, a deeply destructive force that asks you to turn off your only tool of survival, your reason.
Contrast that intense, almost combative stance with Richard Feynman.
Feynman absolutely loves the phrase, "I don't know."
For him, the unknown is not a threat to reason. It is the entire point of science. It is the thrilling, beautiful frontier.
He explicitly states that the open questions why there is something rather than nothing, why the laws of physics are exactly what they are the most exciting places a human mind can be.
Feynman expresses this profound, entirely non-religious awe at physical reality.
He looks at 13.8 billion years of cosmic history, trillions of galaxies spinning in the dark,
Nuclear furnaces inside stars, forging the heavy elements that make up our blood and bones.
a planet cooling down until simple chemistry somehow, miraculously, evolves into biology and eventually into a conscious brain that can look back up at the stars and try to figure out how it all works.
And what's fascinating is his conclusion about that physical reality. He finds a universe that arranged itself according to blind physical law, infinitely more astonishing, more beautiful, and more terrifyingly majestic than a small, neat, primitive universe micromanaged by a creator.
The actual physical truth is grander than any religious myth ever invented.
So, we have Rand, who sees mystery as an epistemological threat to be eradicated by logic. And we have Feynman, who sees mystery as the joyful fuel for scientific discovery.
But the synthesis between them is unbreakable. They both agree entirely that taking a gap in our knowledge and shoving the invalid word God into it is an epistemological crime.
It doesn't answer the question. It just shuts down the inquiry. It stops you from looking for the real answer.
Discarding the concept of God doesn't diminish the world, By wiping away the plastic fog of theism, you don't lose the magic of existence.
You actually bring the real spectacular universe into brilliant, breathtaking focus. You reclaim the sovereignty of your own mind.
It is the ultimate journey of taking intellectual responsibility for yourself.
And what a massive ground we've covered today.
We really did. We started with Rachewsky's blank slate and Feynman's bird, learning the vital difference between naming a concept and actually knowing how it works.
We navigated the epistemological void of the blog analogy, recognizing that an undefined entity is indistinguishable from nothing.
We watched Feynman use information theory to dismantle the complexity trap, showing how an intelligent designer just leads to an endless regression of ultra-gods.
We tackled the cosmological argument, exposing the reification of the zero and affirming Rand's axiom that existence exists, requiring no outside explanation.
We saw the inherent physical contradictions of omniscience in a quantum universe, and we established the profound, empathetic morality of secular humanism.
It is a dense, challenging, but ultimately incredibly liberating journey.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the architecture of reason, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, provocative thought to mull over on your own.
Oh, this is a good one.
We've established that our early human ancestors had pattern recognition software that ran so hot they accidentally invented invisible gods to explain thunder and disease. It was an evolutionary glitch that morphed into thousands of years of dogma.
A glitch we are still dealing with today.
Exactly. So my question to you is this. What other modern, entirely secular concepts are we currently treating as unquestionable sacred entities without even realizing it?
Where are the invisible agents in our politics, our economics, or our culture today?
What modern plastic fogs are you still bowing to right now simply because you haven't yet applied the rigorous, unforgiving light of your own reason?
Think about it.
See you next time.